anytime a group of people decides to finally step out of a ghetto mentality or a ghetto way of living, a ghetto culture, I guess I could say, that community, that group of people begins to thrive, right? When you have those who are considered, let's say, rednecks, stepping out of that ideology, that mentality, that limiting belief system that kept them impoverished, you see prosperity. When you have the Italians who came here in, the earlier stages of the 19, some even late 1800s, these individuals only broke free from that mentality by making a decision that they were no longer going to engage in the criminal behavior. They were no longer going to tolerate certain ways of being. And therefore, as a byproduct, was prosperity. And so when it comes to the quote unquote black community, or more specifically, what we are now seeing as mainstream black culture, there's only one way out of what we are now seeing as this, kind of bastardized, degenerate version of what it once was. What was once a beautiful culture has now morphed into something that most people who grew up in the earlier stages of, this last century, y'all can't even recognize anymore. You turn on the TV or you go on social media, probably more realistically, you're somewhere on social media and you're seeing some of the things that are happening on a daily basis. And I remember things like World Star. World Star was saturated with some of the craziest type of situations, scenarios, people fighting on there. I mean, there was the most ratchet behavior. And you would think to yourself, there's no way this is real. But again, this is being caught in real time. It would be different if it was just propaganda being pushed by some media outlet that was looking to create a narrative. But unfortunately, this is the way in which many of these people have just been used to acting, or I guess have been enabled to act. And it's only when we allow ourselves to let go of that mentality at an individual level and then as a collective. And what I see as the ghetto ideology can be, I guess, also labeled the ratchet mentality, a criminal culture. I've used a multitude of labels for this specific way of thinking, but it's basically a limiting belief system where an individual believes that they are the victim to their circumstances. They are the victim to the conditions of their life. The external is going to determine the internal, and that is used as an excuse as to why they essentially indulge in degenerate behavior. Now, I'm well aware that trauma is real and trauma has its effects, but when you use trauma as a justification for bad behavior, you're not helping the individual at all. You may think that you are giving this person the benefit of the doubt, right? Somebody who is now engaged in criminality, somebody who has a few cases or a few dozen cases. You go to places like New York, you hear stories of people who are getting caught up with 57 arrests. There was a man with like 82 arrests, and they only finally came after him seriously once he had poked up a few people on the subway. But it's like, what is a man doing on the streets who has that many charges on him? Well, we created a culture where that's normalized. For this group of people, that's just what they do. And when it's normalized and it's incentivized, people continue that behavior. And so for me, like, I'm at a place in my life where I'm calling for the end of the ghetto culture, the end of this ghetto mentality. I've said this a few times, and I'll say it as long as I need to, but we are tired. There are those of us who are simply tired of seeing this criminal element, especially connected to us. Like, this is a part of who we are. And I know that when, let's say, some of the other migrant groups who came into the Americas, when they were first, kind of breaking free from a lot of the ghetto mentalities, a lot of the ghetto environments, they also had to create a new way of being, new customs, a new culture, and separate themselves from the culture that was degenerate. They had to separate themselves from that culture that was the problematic part of their, overall culture. Like, you have to weed out, or better description would be, you have to rid the cancer cells from the healthy cells. You can't have the two coexisting. One is going to impact the other, and likely it's going to be the dysfunctional, the corrupted cell that's going to impact the rest of the body. And that's what happens when you have that sort of mentality. It's like, when you're in a group of positive people, you definitely feel the impact. And, it's likely to create some sort of positive impact within your own life, right? Likely. When you're surrounded by negative, toxic individuals, 10 times out of 10, 11 times out of 11, you are going to feel the byproducts of that way of being. Even just energetically, you can feel it, right? When there is just something, there's a dark cloud over a room or whatever it is. There are individuals who are living in a very dysfunctional way. They have chosen to live in such a way, right? They're beyond this adolescent stage or, infantile stage where they are truly a child and the parents are actually responsible for them. I'm talking about grown ass human beings, grown ass individuals making decisions that are dysfunctional, that are toxic, that are harming themselves and others. And, I remember a part of my life when I was involved, I was engaged, I was quote unquote active in certain ways. I never got into the violence because that just wasn't part of my moral compass, but I got into hustling and I was surrounded by hustlers. And you could almost always feel, especially in hindsight, there was always a darkness about it. There was always like it was contagious, that energy. That darkness was genuinely contagious. It just took being surrounded by two people with a corrupted idea. Like it says in the Bible, what does it say? There's a scripture that speaks of the company that you keep. In essence, when you have, bad company corrupts, in essence, right? If you surround yourself with bad company, it will corrupt. There's even, a scripture that says, if you, and this one hits me every single time. If you look for the good, you will find it. If you look for the wrong or the bad or the trouble, it will find you. Trouble is always looking, it's prowling, it's searching. That's why temptation is so easy to fall into if you are not vigilant, if you're not somebody who is disciplined. It is always creeping around the corner. It's easiest to just fall into those destructive habits, even in our own personal lives, to eat a little too much or to eat the wrong foods as opposed to the right foods, to eat that thing you told yourself you weren't going to eat. It's right around the corner. It's looking for you. You have to seek out good. You have to seek out good habits. You have to work and develop and cultivate that morality. Because unfortunately, many of us have been raised in environments that foster the opposite. Many of us have been raised in environments which have a sort of ghetto mentality at some level. And in ghetto, I include, a poverty consciousness or a scarcity consciousness. That is a mindset. You can bring a people who are now impoverished at a scaled level and bring them into prosperity just by changing the way in which the younger generation thinks about resources, about money, etc. You train up a generation into a wealth consciousness and they're going to become wealthy. That's why you have, Chinese immigrants or even Nigerian immigrants, whatever it is, that may have come from some levels of poverty, some abject poverty, right? So it's Nigerian, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, these individuals are prospering. It wasn't the fact that, they came to America and America just has money laying on the floor that they picked up, swooped up and, turned into the bank, whatever it may be. But instead, these individuals made conscious decisions. Their parents likely made conscious decisions to say, we're going to change this mentality. When we talk about breaking these generational curses, that's what we're talking about. This is the end of the ghetto culture. And I'm not saying it's never going to exist again. It will find its new forms or whatever it may be. But so long as I can help it and so long as you can help it, we have to continue to keep this accountable, right? Which has become like a curse word in the 21st century. Accountability is nothing to be afraid of. It is something to embrace. If you're looking for genuine personal power, the far left ideology, these so-called woke activists always talk about empowerment. And I say, how can you have empowerment if you don't have personal agency? How can you have empowerment when you don't have personal responsibility? When you can't look at your life and say, oh, I'm the cause of these things that are happening in my life. If you can't sit back, observe your life and see what you did to get the results that you got, then you are disconnected from reality. Because most parts of your life, especially those parts that mean the most, are a direct byproduct of the things that you did or did not do, the way in which you believed or did not believe. Simple. Why is my relationship the way that it is? Well, maybe I feel like I'm inadequate. I'm not good enough. I have a low self-esteem. I believe that I deserve, nothing but crumbs. So I end up in relationship after relationship that reflects exactly that. I engage and entertain those sort of relationships. When I make a different decision, then I'm going to get a different outcome. It is really that, it's that simple, but also that difficult, right? The difficulty is not in the complexity of the thing. It's in the fact that it takes us everything to let go of our old identity. That ghetto mentality is an identity that's been clinged onto. It's a way of being. People feel as if they let that go, they're betraying some aspect of themselves, some aspect of their lineage, some aspect of their family, right? This sounds crazy, but that's how the subconscious mind works. You could be holding on to a belief that, in order to love my family, I have to be like them. And so you come from a dysfunctional background. You come from a dysfunctional family. You come from a ghetto mentality. And you know that it is best for you to break free from that. There's a part of you that's going to feel like there's a betrayal to what once was. That's why there's such an emotional response when you talk about things like the democratic plantation and breaking free from that democratic mindset, that victimhood mindset, that neo-Marxist mindset, whatever you want to label it, that mindset that says that everybody else is to blame and I am a victim in my life. I am a victim in my story. When you are dealing with these individuals, they become very emotional because they're tied to an identity, and that identity is basically them. They say, this is me. You are attacking me. When I speak, I'm really speaking to ideas. I know sometimes, I can throw in a little pettiness and, personal insults or whatever it may be. I'm polishing that up. I can't promise no petty, but I really am looking to get to the point of it's the ideas, just like it says in scripture. It is not man and blood. It is not flesh and blood. It is not the physical, but it is principalities, higher things. It is spirits that we're dealing with. It is energy. It is, you know what I mean? It is the unseen that we're dealing with here. It is thought forms. It is thought patterns. That's why it is to renew your mind daily, because there are beliefs that you have picked up along the way. There are thought patterns. There are ways of being that you have picked up that need to be renewed. We have to step out of that ghetto mentality if we're going to prosper. Every nation, every community, every family, every individual that has ever found their way out of that ghetto mentality, that has found their way out of that degenerate, dysfunctional, toxic, these generational curses, every single one of these individuals who have found themselves out of that space were individuals who had to make a decision to get out of that space. It doesn't happen by default. It doesn't happen by happenstance. You can hold an intention. Like I used to create a lot of content around quote unquote spirituality and what I thought I knew every damn thing, right? How to manifest, etc. I got into that and a lot of things I was wrong about. I was likely trying to avoid a lot of the actions necessary in order to get the outcomes that I wanted. But during that time, it's like I had a lot of wishful thinking. And a lot of people exist in wishful thinking. They want a different result in their life, but they're not willing to do anything different. They want their life to show up different, but they're not willing to show up any different. And I promise you one thing. I don't know all things, but I know this one thing. If you don't move different, if you don't do something different, you're simply not going to get a different result. I had to change my approach to the way in which I create content. I had to be more real, more honest, more open, more upfront, more of myself, show all sides of myself, not just, looking for, okay, what's not going to be offensive, what's not going to ruffle people's feathers and still get a point across. Nah, to hell with all of that. I got to be as real as I can. And I got to allow this thing to flow. When you got a gift, you got to allow it to flow. Picasso painted tens of thousands of paintings throughout his life, right? That would mean in a day he might paint 12, 15, 20, whatever it is, because it's in him. You got to let that thing flow. So I had to move different. If I moved the same way I was before and, blaming the algorithm as to why things aren't moving the way I wanted to, well, it's just saturated. All these excuses, again, the ghetto mentality is nothing more than a bunch of excuses. And oftentimes, racism, the white man, this one, the system, injustice, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that some of these things don't exist. I'm just saying, are they really the thing holding you back? The likelihood is they're not. The likelihood is that you are the one holding yourself back. The likelihood is that there are belief systems that you hold and you cling to for whatever given reason. And I'm not going to judge you for those beliefs, but I'm going to tell you the truth that they're holding you back. You're holding yourself back. Simple. Nah, but if only the government had not done this. Look, we lived through Bidenomics. We lived through one of the most tragic presidencies in human history, not just American history. This dude was like Caligula back in ancient Rome. This dude was a complete saboteur. I don't think it was even him, to be honest. As a matter of fact, we know that some of that at least was not him, right? That's been outed, that he wasn't actually the one signing. Well, he was signing the paperwork, but not the one who was creating those documents, who was creating the legislation. He was not the one who was essentially pulling the strings. But Even with that being said, through Bidenomics, I started to thrive. I started to really build platforms. I started to really speak my mind. I started to do things in a very different way. And even in the time when some may have been struggling and I may have been found reason to struggle, I started doing better financially than I had in any year prior, including the past Trump legislation, because it had nothing to do with the politics and everything to do with the decisions that I was making. Was I investing in myself or was I taking away? Was I being productive or destructive? And that is the end of the ghetto culture. It is the end for us as an individual, and then the end of it in our family spaces. We don't allow for certain behaviors. You know, a lot of young men are thirsty. They're even young women, young men and women, grown men, grown women, as a matter of fact, for like, you know, what matters? What makes me a man? What makes me a this? And I say beyond anything else is going to be who you are, your character. Are you somebody of integrity? That is always number one. Is your word bond? You say what you mean what you say. When you make that promise, is a promise, or is it just lip service? Are you just saying it to say it? When you tell that woman that you committed, are you saying that because you mean it? Or are you saying it because you just want a little change, you know, do something strange for a piece of change? Like, are you just looking for a little something right now? And if you are a man, then you're going to be one who stands on principle. If you are a man, not just a grown adult male, you're going to live in a certain way. If you are, you know, a woman of honor, a woman of integrity, a woman of righteousness, then you're going to show up in the world a different way. You're not only not going to involve yourself in this sort of behavior, but you're also not going to egg it on. You're going to be the type to make the difficult decision to call it out. Again, that's the only way that it leaves. It's the only way that we can eradicate it. There are countries that will literally arrest you for some of the pettiest seeming crimes, but they have the lowest crime rates because people know not to play like that. People won't go out their way to do those things. And you start to create a different incentive. You start to create a different normal. You start to create a different pedestal, right? When there's no space for sexy red, then nobody wants to become a sexy red. When you are shamed for being a sexy red instead of being acknowledged or put on this pedestal, then you will find yourself having no more sexy reds. Until then, you're going to have a plethora of sexy red. You will have a plethora of futures. You have a plethora of, you know, poo shiesties, whoever they are. I'm so tapped out of this damn game. I don't know who's who anymore. But you only have that because you have a market for it. You only have that because you have an acceptance of it. And instead of it being publicly shamed. Again, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, the artists weren't doing that. The artists had some dignity and some pride around them because that's the only way you could be. You couldn't show up and be this dysfunctional, degenerate, whatever it is. You simply couldn't. This is the end of the ghetto culture, period.
I used to be afraid of the dark, a place unknown like a hardening heart. I used to see my life in the bar. Now the kids unchained, every shackle is lost. 2 steps in the moonlight, 2 step in the daytime. You just know when it feel right. You got a feeling the time's not. See you through those shades that I just threw on. Through my lenses, you just can't do no wrong. I fell in love with myself again. I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night. I know the time is taking. A 3, 6, 5, that's a full rotation. I see you looking up.